Hey everybody, I want to continue talking about what to expect when a narcissist leaves you. There's a part 1 video, so obviously this is part 2. I want to talk about what to expect whenever it comes to children. And this is just a 90 mile an hour overview. But as you can expect, the children are going to become a hotly contested area in your life. One of the things that a narcissistic parent attempts to do, and typically succeeds at doing, is to turn the children against you in some way. And they don't do this directly. They don't do this by bad-mouthing you. They do it by not bad-mouthing you. And I know that sounds weird, but let me explain. What we know in clinical psychology is that narcissistic and borderline personalities originate from the same underlying attachment style, and the underlying attachment style in this case is disorganized attachment. What that means is people with narcissistic borderline personalities come from a childhood or a youth in which they had a caretaker that was simultaneously causing harm and providing care. When children are young, they cannot reconcile the evolutionary understanding of you are my parent, you are my caretaker, you provide protection and security. They cannot reconcile that against a parent who is intentionally causing them harm, pain, damage, and destruction. It's one reason why they say spankings are so damaging to children, because you are supposed to be the protector, you're the one who is supposed to be keeping them safe, and you are also hurting them on purpose. And the young brain doesn't understand cause and effect, and so that's a big part of the problem later in life, is you get this disorganized attachment. What that means is, children and people in general grow up, they understand the fight or flight response, they know how to assess threats, they know how to assess allies and enemies. But when you are a parent or a caretaker who is both, they cannot simultaneously process you as both friend and foe. So what has to happen, children have to shut down one whole side of that network to entertain the other. So in other words, when you're being their friend, they have to shut down the foe side, right? It's like, okay, so now you're my friend. They have to completely disavow the fact that you could be a foe and you could cause them harm. Whenever you're causing them harm, then the other thing is true. They are the enemy. They are causing harm. They're not my friend right now. And what you end up with is, as the child develops and grows into adulthood, you get what's called splitting. Splitting is exactly that. You're either completely for or completely against somebody. If you're not for me, then you're against me. That type of mentality. And narcissism and narcissistic borderline personalities both stem exclusively from that. So when you see splitting, the whole for me or against me kind of thing, when you see a splitting type pathogen in a family structure, especially in a divided family structure, the parent who is aligned with the children is usually the narcissistic borderline personality. And this is well documented in clinical psychology. It took me years to find this, and I finally found it, thank God. There are some anecdotal conditions or situations. So something by, I guess it's a condition that's defined more by the legal system, parental alienation syndrome. It's not actually a thing in clinical psychology. Nowhere in clinical psychology does it exist. It's sort of a pseudo-scientific, pseudo-psychological definition of something that doesn't stand up well to the actual criteria needed to diagnose something. So most clinical psychologists will roll their eyes the second you say parental alienation syndrome. That's not at all what it is. It's the underlying pathogen of disorganized attachment style developing from childhood. And then more importantly, it's the fact that they were unable to heal the initial traumas that they were subjected to. So there's been, splitting has occurred. A disorganized attachment style was present in youth and in childhood. Healing has not occurred from that. And as a result, the whole "you're for me or against me" psychology comes into play. So how does the narcissistic borderline parent align the children with them? You have to understand a couple of things about child psychology. First, children can become what's called a precocious caregiver, meaning that they need to grow up quick. So you see this a lot with older siblings that have to take care of their younger siblings. They are the ones that feel responsible for adults. Most prevalently, they're the people pleasers. They want to make people happy, and you see this a lot in split families where the children just want both adults to be happy because they get something out of it. They want the adults in their lives to be happy so they can be happy, right? So children have this need to please parents, and that usually means giving them the right answer, right? So there's facts, and then there's the right answer that the parent wants to hear that makes the parent happy. And why do kids want to do this? Because children can tell that whenever a parent is anxiously awaiting or expecting a given result, that parent remains anxious, and life under an anxious parent is fucking miserable. And so there sort of becomes this quick drive to please the parent. So here's an example. Like, how was your visit with mom or dad? It was good. Really? It was just good? Yeah. Nothing bad happened? No. So everything was just fine? Yeah. There was absolutely nothing at all? Well, I was bored. Oh, you were bored, huh? So it's like, and then they lied into that. Well, eventually, time and time again, children just sort of fall into the rhythm. They know that, life is not going to return to normal until they say something derogatory and negative about the other household. And what this accomplishes is the illusion that the children are just coming over and just talking about how horrible it is at your house, at the other person's house. And it's like, you're the normal parent, they're the warped, messed up parent, except now they have the children spouting off all this horrible stuff that you're supposedly doing. This is very well documented, but it's not called parental alienation syndrome. It doesn't even really have a specific name to call it. It's just part of the underlying pathology of narcissistic borderline parents and how they handle divorce and separation. Now, what drives them to do this? Because they're not, most of the time, they are not purposefully planning this type of interaction with children. As a matter of fact, it's usually completely unplanned. Into them, in their world, the children are just doing it all on their own accord, voluntarily. So how is it that they're unaware of this? Well, to get back to what I said in the beginning, where they had the splitting with the parent and they had the disorganized attachment, usually in their life where they grow up, and this is not the golden rule for every single individual. I'm just saying, work with me here, okay? This is one example. I only get so many minutes per video. Most children, if children grew up with one abusive parent and one messianic parent, in other words, the parent that's their advocate that defends them from the abusive one, they grow up and they understand one thing: child, abusive parent, protective parent, right? So that's sort of how they grow up. There's an abusive parent and there's a protective parent. And so that's their definition of family structure. Well, whenever you split and they have the children, they still have that same model, except they don't see themselves as the abusive parent. They see themselves as the protective parent. And it usually comes from a place of well-meaning, and I know that sounds weird, but in their mind, if they're not the abusive parent, that means you've got to be the abusive parent. And it's weird because when they're with you, whenever they're married and you have children, in their minds, they have done their job to make sure that their children will not be, susceptible to the same abuses that they lived in childhood. In other words, I want you to have a better childhood than me. Growing up, I had, my mother or my father was really abusive. I don't want that for you. I want you to have a good life, an abuse-free life. It's a noble cause to have. But then, when they're with you, their psychology is that, hey, we have two healthy, two normal parents, right? But then, as things start to deteriorate, they start to see you as not being a good parent. They see you as the bad parent. And then something incredible happens when the divorce officially happens, when the split is official. Those two networks fuse into one. So their childhood network of child, abusive parent, protective parent, gets merged into the adult perspective where they are the protective parent. You have the child, and that only leaves one alternative, one thing that they know. The only thing they know is that the other parent's going to be abusive. And the two fuse, and they can't reconcile. They cannot reconcile you as being a non-abusive parent. Why? Because what led to the divorce to begin with was all the problems they had with you. So you are flawed. So you are a flawed parent. They are the unflawed parent. And so when the divorce happens, when the split happens, when the separation happens, whatever you want to call it, they see you as the flawed parent, and they are the unflawed protective parent. And so then with that, they come at the situation with unbelievable amounts of anxiety. They get this anxiety about, when the child's not with me, I can't protect them. I can't protect my child. I can't reconcile the fact that my child's not with me and I can't protect them. It comes with this anxiety. So whenever they finally get the child, they're like, oh my God, now that I have you, I can protect you. Tell me all the bad things, right? And if the child's like, no, nothing bad happened, they can't reconcile that, because they just know that you are the abusive parent. They just know that you're the bad parent. And so they can't let it go. They can't let it go because they're going to think that the child's just trying to protect you, or that the child just doesn't want to talk about it. Maybe the child's feeling like, there's shame and victimhood. All of these things. And so they come at it, and they come at it, and they come at it. They come at the child until the child says something negative. And then that releases the anxiety, that releases the tension. And the parent's like, oh my God, I knew it. And then before long, that's whenever you have the children just flat out saying, yeah, my dad abuses me. My mother is abusive. My dad is abusive. Why? Because the other parent is telling me that, and the other parent is validating what I'm telling them as abuse. And it doesn't take long. It takes maybe a couple of months for this to start taking place. And then in the child's mind, if there's no interventions, the child just begins to believe that it's true. They say, oh, well, my dad's abusive. Well, what do you mean abusive? Well, he took away my Xbox. Well, why is that abusive? Well, why did he take away your Xbox? Well, because I didn't do what I was supposed to do. Well, that's not abuse, that's discipline. Really? Because I've got a parent telling me that's abuse. And then the child has trouble reconciling that. So all this to say, there's not really an answer to it yet, not that I've found. But at least if you understand the underpinnings of it and what's going on, you can try to combat this. You need to combat it by, whenever your child's with you, set the definitions correctly, right? And you say things like, this is not punishment, these are consequences. All right, consequences are natural conclusions, natural results of a given action, right? This isn't punishment, no, it's not abuse, no, it's not punishment. But we have to have rules. Why is it at school there's rules and there's expected conduct and there's consequences of bad conduct? And at the other person's house, they have rules and conduct and expectations of conduct. But at my house, I have rules and I have expectations of conduct and consequences, and it's framed as abuse. And the kids don't really know. Well, it's abuse because parents, adults are telling me that. The adults are telling me this because of what I'm telling them I go through, and adults are setting the definitions. So anyways, I'm out of time. Thanks again. Please like, comment, or share. I'll see you on another video.